So again, welcome. Today we are going through onboarding a new ARM user. So we'll have a variety of subjects. Primarily will be in PowerPoint here, and it's not switching to my other presentation. One moment here while I want my slides here to show up on this screen instead. There we go. All right, here we go. So to get started here, as I said, we'll kind of go through the sequence, maybe the sequence of events for getting, if it's a new employee, here we're kind of starting at the beginning of the year. If you have that scenario, or even some of these things, even if you're just switching over to a different computer, a couple of these things throughout here might apply as well. But primarily, we've got somebody new. And the first question is how are we going to license them? How are they going to get ARM linked to them? And so for the ARM licensing, one license for the software activates one computer. So a computer, then you have that login name and password assigned as the investigator for that research. And so you would just very roughly how many people are using the ARM in our company equals how many licenses we would need. There are scenarios you can share a computer. Really at the core of the licensing, it is activating a machine. So if you do have a kind of a common computer in the research station where a bunch of people can get in there and maybe fill in data, if you've got interns, things like that, that's totally fair game as well. Again, it's primarily that hardware, that computer sitting there would be the licensing or the users that log in. So if you have a new person, then I probably need to look at purchasing a new license. However, if you do have a previous license, if it's been unused, or maybe just this new person has replaced the old person who did have a license, we can reassign is the term we call it, but basically just changing the name, changing the login details for that license. So that part is free of charge. We can change the name however many times you would need to on a given license. It's just a new name and password combination for that license. If you kind of just depending on how long ago it was that license was used, you may have to back pay a little maintenance. If it hadn't been since 2021 that the license was used, you might have to catch that license up a little bit, but a lot of times it ends up being cheaper than a brand new license in the end. So if you're not quite sure history-wise of that, definitely let us know. Dawn from our sales inbox would love to look up your company and see if there's any that aren't being used or something and get that into the right person's hands. So just a real quick highlight, maybe the two main licensing options. So in that scenario where we do need a new license, the two main options you would look at would be what we call a full ARM license, which is just your standard functionality. Everything's there. That's what the majority of licenses are out there. So you just get the standard ARM and all of its functionality. Any add-ins like the summary across trials, tablet data collector, things like that are all extra. And you can add those at any time. So especially for a new person, there's no penalty, there's no discount for bundling and putting a bunch together all at one time. If you add it later or add it right away, it's all basically the same difference for us as far as that goes. The one exception, the one other thing, option to consider for the licensing would be what we call the field bundle. And so that has kind of the ARM side of things. ARM is just a little bit limited in the features that are available, primarily just anything you would do in the field or tied specifically to field work. So things like creating a brand new protocol or generating a trial from a protocol or doing final reporting, those types of things are not included. So we kind of dropped out some of those, administrator level, really high level things that aren't directly tied to just being out in the field. And we took those out to kind of reduce the base price of that ARM function in order to fit in the TDCX, the tablet data collector features, and thus we kind of gave it the name bundle. So that can be useful for, again, somebody out in the field, maybe they're, they would have a device that would be handy to take in and out of the field and back to the office. Nowadays there are some pretty nice hardware options, even like a Surface Pro where it's a tablet, but it can connect to a bunch of different things, or there's rugged tablets out in the market that'll withstand the field, but also have strong enough processors to connect to monitors in the office and things like that, and do everyday work as well. So that's a nice alternative option for an additional employee. Again, just depending on what do they want to do with it and what functions they might want. And I guess I didn't put pricing up here just because that changes so much as time goes on, and also your region. So if you have a local representative for your area, they would be the best person to check with the pricing. But just real roughly, what we have here in the US and in your region might vary with the VAT and different things like that, but just frame of reference, the full license is $1,245 US, with a maintenance of $465 each year after that. So you kind of have just an upfront license purchasing, but then it's year to year after that much cheaper. And then the field bundle is $999 US, so just a couple $100 cheaper on that first upfront cost, and then the maintenance $419 US. So again, just comes in just a little less expensive than that full license, and hopefully fits just a particular type of user in the company. All right, so that's kind of getting the first step. Would find out what license that individual would be using. Once we have that license in hand, you get the official email from our inbox. Then we can move on to installation. And so if you're working with a brand new computer, in that email actually that you get, that kind of gives the login information to use for the license. That also has installation steps to follow. Or we also have information on our website. So there's a download ARM button just in the quick links section. And actually I can bring that up real quick. Just right on the left on any page that you're at, there's a big download ARM button. And that'll take you here to be able to download ARM onto your computer. So pretty straightforward. If you're helping the new person out with that, it's actually just the check for updates tool that will pop up. It's just smart enough to know that, hey, there's no ARM installed here, so it needs to download the full installation package instead of just a typical update that you do farther down the road. If the employee has kind of inherited a computer that already has ARM on it, then you don't have to go through, you have to fully install, or you don't have to uninstall the old one in order to get the new one on there. That you can make use of that installation. Just run check for updates then. And if your login information has changed because we reassigned, gave the license a new name, you just log in with that new name. That'll update the local license, so ARM knows that this, the user has changed. And of course, if it is an older version that you're running, then check for updates will make sure you have the latest version. So then once you have ARM installed, the very first time you log in, there is just a license activation process that pops up. It's usually very straightforward. It just tells you have to activate, and they'll fill in your computer name that just goes into the system to know and kind of identify that computer. If we needed to look up, where's the old computer, what was it called, things like that. So typically that's pretty cut and dried. You just click OK, move on, and ARM will open up. In some cases, though, just depending on that license, and if we were using one from before, there might be a warning that maybe the license is already used on another computer. So if that's the case, maybe we haven't reassigned the license yet, and we're just using the previous person's login just to get started. Just send us an email in our support box if there's no hope for finding the old computer, or it's been reformatted and long gone. We can unlink that license from the old computer, so that way on this new one we're trying to get into ARM with, then you'll be able to get through. So just send us a note, include your license serial number, and we can get that taken care of, so that way you can get into ARM and get started with it. So that's the installation steps, hopefully fairly straightforward. Of course, you just never know with security settings or IT what you might encounter in the installation, but of course you can always contact us if you're getting any error messages or troubles getting the installation going. So once you've installed ARM, and kind of that first time you log in, there's kind of a little welcome wizard that pops up. And one of the options is it will offer for you to load in a migration package. And so this is something that really can help speed up this kind of whole installation process. We'll end up talking about each of the components anyway here if you don't have one of these available, but it's a really great way to get kick-started with ARM. And originally, this migration package, we designed it to be for a process of, all right, I have purchased a new computer and I want to move my existing information about ARM to this new computer under this same person. And so with that, of course, you'd want to save any of your options that you've set in ARM, your personal lists, your SE files, anything you've kind of customized and made your own within ARM on that computer, and save that all up to move it to the new computer. So that way you can start off right where you left off on the old. Kind of the nice side effect of this tool is that it's actually really great, not just for the same person for a new computer, but you can use that to get a new employee up and running right away and mimic the setup of an established person's information. So within today's session, that's really why this migration matters, not so much to move from one to another, but how about I copy what I've got on my computer as a person who has been using ARM and so on. I'll just copy all that information so that way this new employee on a different computer can kind of start where I've started. And of course, they can always make changes. It's just a copy across, so they won't impact anything on my computer. They can be free to change their options once they are onto their computer. But a real nice way to, instead of starting with empty everything and starting with the defaults, it can be a way to get them rolling. And the third bullet point, just another way to make use of that migration package would be kind of a rollback point, kind of backing up of your own configuration. So sometimes we bring that up in kind of a end of season or the start of a new season, just for your own use as you use ARM. Save up all those configurations and just stash it somewhere on a flash drive or the network location. So that way, if something happens to my computer mid-season, I can fall back on that, all of those options and stuff. Especially if something goes wrong in the middle of the season, time is obviously pretty critical, and that's a nice lifesaver to have that stashed somewhere. So that's the migration package, and why that really would matter. As I said, the very first time you log in, typically there's a little wizard that will ask you if you want to load in a migration package. If the package isn't ready at that time, or you don't see that little wizard within ARM, you can always load one from the utilities menu. So under utilities, you can load migration package to find those files. For that existing user who would want to create the migration package, that is also from the utilities menu, and you would run the migrate studies and settings to a new computer. And that's the process to create this package from the get-go. Usually the first option there to create that is it's going to either use your existing backup path, or it might ask you to choose a path. And it's got some logic in here. So right now I do have a backup path set, but it's on my local computer. So there is some logic where it's like, hey, you might want to save it to an external drive, because again, it's kind of assuming the scenario of moving to a new computer. But you can even just stick to the local one if you want to, and then copy it to a USB drive or whatever. ARM will eventually accept that, but there's just a little bit of double checking. Hey, you're saving this on your local device, so it might make more sense to just plug in a flash drive, or save it to your network Dropbox type of location, so that way it's easy for that other person to find it. And then really the only other step in this process to create is ARM will ask what you want to create, what components should be included. And typically, I recommend just the first two options. So your settings, really your options you've configured in ARM, and then the middle option here, the personalization of study definition files. That's your SEs, your rule sets, any of those files you've maybe created within ARM, and also your lists, your personal lists or favorites lists that you've set up and added items to throughout all the different areas of ARM. So include those two, and that'll make a copy of those files into that location of that migration file, which then can be loaded by that new individual. So there's a question about if we're not using the migration feature, you're really not losing out on anything. So this certainly would not be a requirement to do. This is really just a suggestion to kind of kickstart that new user. So if you don't do the migration package, then that new individual will just have a quote unquote empty ARM. So it'll, the options will just be their defaults. All the favorites list will be empty until they start to add their own favorites. There won't be any SE files or rule sets. They would have to go in and create their own, or browse out to the company, shared folder if people are saving them out there. So definitely not going to really lose out on anything by not using that migration package. More of just a, hey, here's a quick way to get them started, but certainly not a requirement. A good clarification for that. All right, so now in our kind of our train of thought here, we've installed ARM. We've maybe or maybe not loaded a migration package, but we can kind of just talk about the real basic options and things that maybe before you even really start talking about research, just to kind of get ARM set up. And real quick, I had a question popping in here, changing the license details. Yes, that question here would be the reassign is what we call that. And so that's free of charge. We can always change that investigator name on the license, and then that of course creates a new password as well. You can just go out to our website. Actually, it's a great point I didn't show earlier. Let me grab the website here. And you can do that just from our ordering page. Or again, if you have a local representative that you're in touch with all the time, that they can also help you with that. But just under our sales ordering here, we have our order form. And in this case, it would be a reassign action. So again, that changing of the name is free of charge, but it works nice. The order form is helpful, so that way we can get all the contact details and make sure we spell the name right, and we can just copy and paste into our system, so we don't have any typos or anything to get those license details correct for the new person. So a good question for getting that new license put in place. And so one last clarification on the migration package with that next question about the treatment list would not be available. So for a brand new user who does not use the migration package or anything like that, they just do a fresh installation of ARM, their treatment list would only be the default standard ones. And I think for us with that standard installation, there are some example treatments in there. It's by no means comprehensive. I'm not sure if any of them are even useful, but at the very least, there's a few items by default in the treatment product lists. But of course, those are just the defaults. So that one would be one reason if your company has a lot of products that you typically are filling in and adding to that treatment list. That's an advantage to use the migration feature. If you don't copy those over, that new person will just have the default standard, not a whole lot of useful treatments in their list. Kind of the same as really most other lists within ARM. The favorites will be empty. They'll still have access to the master lists. Yeah, those areas of ARM where you kind of have to start from scratch. The treatments, your application, the application equipment, things like that will be empty if you start from scratch. All right, great questions. Same user moving from an old to a new computer, it would be the same scenario for this initial configuration. So if you don't use a migration package, and whether it's a new person or the old person, when you log into ARM, all of these files, your lists, your favorites, things like that, are only saved on the local computer. So there's no like online account that we have information about each person saved in the cloud somewhere. It's all just managed locally. So I've got my lists, I've got everything I've been doing on my computer. If I get a new computer, I'd have to start all over, whether it's a totally brand new user or if it's just me moving to a new computer. I would have to start all over if I don't use any tools to migrate anything. Yeah, thanks for clarifying. Kind of a couple moving parts, whether we're talking about a new person, same person. Hopefully that's clear then. Kind of how that works and kind of how you can shortcut some of that by using the options in the ARM. All right, so moving back to ARM. And this would be probably approximately what you would see when you first log in to ARM that first time. So I think one of the good things to just before you really dive in, go into the tools menu and take a look at the ARM options. Now there's a lot of options here, and I say typically I'll highlight kind of some of the ones that really matter, that would make a lot of sense to look at. There's going to be quite a few on the screen that we ignore. And I'll say not so much ignore like they're useless, but in most cases, the defaults are fine. And then if you are looking for, I want ARM to do something slightly different, or why is it behaving this way, then it makes more sense to come back into the options and try to find a specific option for the functionality that you're looking for, or the functionality you want to stop. And so kind of talk through the ones that jump out on the screen here that people would typically go to. And then the rest, don't fret about, don't feel like you have to read every one and understand every single option on these screens in order to really get started with ARM. We'll point out the ones that matter, and the rest usually just leave as the defaults, and it'll be no harm, no foul. So on this general section, the main ones are kind of at the top. So we've got measurement units, and that would be for most places within ARM, kind of what you would expect, whether you use the metric for your measurement units or US standard. There is one exception, so this will affect pretty much everywhere in ARM, except for when you're defining your treatments. So in a specific protocol or a trial, the units that you'll see as you define your product rates, things like that is actually controlled in the specific trial settings or protocol settings. But everywhere else in ARM, the measurement unit will be controlled right here on the general tab. Language, we have a few different translations within ARM. So for the different dialogues, the different options you see on the screen, we have a few different languages you can toggle. And so I think it's about 9 in total. There's a couple here that we have available, but I don't have on my list. And that's because something like Korean, for example, has a different character set. So it really requires your Windows settings would need to be, if you had a Korean Windows installation, for example, then that would appear here in this language list. So I'm usually limited in my sharing of a couple of those that have what they call Unicode characters. So, totally different character set, little hard for Windows to have every single character set in the world all in one spot. So we're kind of limited in this list, although there actually are just a couple more that are possible. But just to demonstrate that if you do change that language, then it will affect all of the options, the dialogues that'll come up on the screen. There is also kind of a question here that you definitely want to say yes to, just because within the trial or protocol itself, the screen prompts and things like that, if you want that to also be in Spanish, in this case, the language that you're choosing, then you want to click yes. So just the way ARM is structured, it's technically two different sets of translations, although of course, if you just want that consistent look, then you would want to say yes as well. And you'll see now that all of my options have changed. The text here on different functions. If I just bring up one of the wizards, all the text there is set to the language that I chose. And I'm going to switch back to English before I get too far. I can't say my Spanish is particularly great, so we'll stick to the US English. But that would be the language setting for your ARM. Last major option here would be right underneath, and that's just check for updates. So ARM can periodically run the updater just to make sure that every so often you check to see if there's a new version. And by default, it's set to weekly, but you can change the frequency. In general, software updates, it's usually about once a quarter. And we have 4 or maybe 5 across the year that you'll see. So the main software version, not terribly frequently, but we do have more common dictionary updates if there's a new rating type to include, or different lists. The master lists in ARM may have some additions throughout the season. Or if you're working with company customizations, they of course have their own schedules of what might roll out, and definitely for those dictionary updates as well, they kind of have the same type of thing. So can't hurt to kind of run that, and it'll run only once you close your last ARM window. Will that update trigger? Okay, so that's probably the big 3 here on this first section. The next one to look at would just be under the File tab, specifically to show where that backup path is. So we've referenced this once when we were talking about building the migration package, and ARM would use this path. But really the backup is, I think, an important thing to set when you first get your ARM going, because what ARM can do as you work on files and you save trial information or protocol information as you're working on different files, when you press save, ARM can keep a backup of that version of the file into this backup path, in addition to saving it wherever your file is at. And the advantage with that is it really creates a history. So it creates a history of each individual file throughout time as you've worked on it and saved it. So it creates the ability to roll back. One example, if you realize you open up the wrong trial and you enter data and hit save, and then you realize, wait a minute, that was the wrong trial. It can be handy just to roll back to the way that file was yesterday, or even an hour ago, or whatever. Sometimes if your files are on like a network drive or cloud storage, and maybe just the timing's wrong, when you hit save, the internet goes out, or something weird happens, and that file doesn't get saved correctly, somehow got corrupted, something weird happened with the files out there across the network. Again, that backup is really handy. You can just go back to the last saved version from the backup drive, and ARM just copies that out to where the file is at. And then obviously kind of the worst case scenario, if something happens to your hard drive and all of your files were on the hard drive, then it's kind of a concern if your backup path is someplace separate, not just on your hard drive, or at least primarily separate from where your trial files are saved, then that backup can be invaluable to bring back all of your files all at once to get the latest versions of where they work. Nowadays, I think that scenario is a little less scary with the drop boxes and the OneDrives and network locations, that you really should already have all of your files in the cloud somewhere to some extent, whether it's a cloud service or just your company's network location. So that way you're not in trouble if your hard drive dies, that all of your trials are gone. hopefully they're somewhere else. But that's one protection against that would be the backup path. And yeah, another suggestion with the question, deleting deleting a study on accident. That's exactly right. You'd be able to retrieve it from your backup folder as well. So if something happened and it got removed, you'd still have all those copies in your backup folder to be able to use. So that's exactly right. Another good example for that. And a quick clarification, if you notice this option underneath here, the backup interval, I think the name of that might sound like ARM just is continually backing things up, or maybe would auto save, but that's not quite what this is. So the backup is only when you press save, whether it's the keyboard shortcut Control S or the save over here on your toolbar, but that's the only time it'll back things up. This interval will affect how often it creates a backup version. So for example, if I'm working on files, and I don't do research, so I'm not usually in ARM making a bunch of changes, but if I'm creating a tutorial file or I'm in a Word document or something, I'm a chronic saver. So I hit Control S just every 2 minutes. Anytime my brain thinks about the work I've done, I hit save because I'm paranoid that I don't want to lose that work. So if you press save a whole bunch of times, of course, you might not want hundreds of versions as you go in your backup. Maybe I only need a version every 30 minutes or 60 minutes. How far apart should ARM wait before it makes a new backup of that particular file? So that's what this interval is. So if I press save right now in a file and this option was set to 20, then in 2 minutes, if I press save, it's not going to create a new backup file yet because we just created one 2 minutes ago. But maybe a half hour later, I'm still in this file, I press save, then it'll create a backup because the interval now is larger than what I've set it to here. So that's what that tool is, that function. It's not an auto backup, but just how often should I create that previous version? Do I need to do it every single time, or can there be a little latency? All right, the rest of these options usually kind of can go with the defaults. Sometimes when ARM prompts you where you want to load or save something, if you change that location, then it'll change here. So not a whole lot to necessarily have to come looking for in there. Maybe the last major one in the options would be your display settings. So things like how you would want the date and time to appear within ARM, your GPS coordinates, how should those be formatted? You can set the font, and that really would set both the font itself and if you want it bold or the text size, things like that. That would be for the program font. What text you see on the screen in ARM would be the program font. If you're in a trial or protocol in a rich text field, where it's that mini Word document, that's really where you would control the default font in there, so that you can kind of customize the appearance of the text and the formatting. You can also control colors as well. So if something's a little hard to see based just on the defaults, or you want to customize just the way ARM colors certain things, you would choose the screen element is like, okay, what object are we referring to? And then the background color, some of them have foreground colors as well. So the font would be the color of the text, and then the background would be the shading that happens behind there. So that's how you can change your colors, or if you try a color and it really doesn't work and it makes things hard to read, there's a reset as well. One quick follow-up question on this backup interval about if you don't routinely save documents while you're working on them, only when you're done, would it make sense to set the backup interval to a low number? And so this interval only affects when you actually do press save. So right now we don't have an auto save function, which I think is kind of what you're asking about. It is something we've had requested. So it's kind of on our wish list to maybe have, because I think Word and Microsoft Office can do that, where if you've been working for a few minutes, it just kind of saves in the background, saves a copy. So that way, if something happens, you can recover it. So we don't currently have that function, and that's not what this interval does for us. But definitely on our roadmap of ideas of things we could add would be an auto save for if you've been working a while and you didn't think to press save and something goes wrong, ARM crashes, your computer dies. Yeah, currently we don't have really any protection for that, no auto save, but definitely something that might be helpful in the future. And a good tip on the color bands. So that color bands, those are on by default in the treatments section, but I think there is, as you're referencing, there's also an option to turn those on in the assessment section as well. And you can control what to color. Sounds, coloring replicates might be handy, things like that. So yeah, that's how you can kind of control the appearance of ARM and the different sections they're in. All right, let's see if we covered all kind of the big ones. Again, all the other ones we kind of avoided, and there's several tabs we didn't really click on. Again, usually the defaults will be good enough, but if you're looking for something specific, it'd be good to dive into some of those other sections, or send us an email asking if it's possible to have this behavior, and we can let you know and find that option for you. That can always save you time than digging for a long time for something. All right, last option in this topic here for kind of getting your ARM started would be the study list. So if you open your ARM without opening a specific file, then we are usually presented with this study list window. And so the study list is ARM's tracking of the files the ARM files that I've worked on. So if you're brand new and the only one in your company, or starting out on creating your own set of files, as you create them, ARM will add them to this list. If you're joining a group that already has a bunch of files, we can train ARM, show ARM where all of those existing files are to build up that list without having to open them one by one. So to do that, we can rebuild the study list. So there's a button down here in the corner on the list itself. Otherwise, under the utilities menu, we can also get to the same thing by rebuild study list. So the rebuild, again, is really just let's have ARM go out and find files and put them in my list. So for that scenario with a brand new person, let's have ARM go out and find that network location where everyone's saving files to, so that way they can see all that's out there. So when you're brand new, you would use the search specified path, and you can browse to a specific folder out on the network or Dropbox or wherever the company is saving the files to. And you can just pick kind of the highest level folder that you want ARM to look into. So, a lot of times I see companies kind of group by trial year. So when you start a new year, you have an empty folder. And then within that folder, probably for every company that you work with, there's another subfolder or different projects. And, there can be all sorts of different folder structures and things like that. If you just pick the highest level one that ARM can search in, then there's an option here to search subfolders. So ARM can look in every folder within that one that you selected. So if I'm just gearing up for this season, I only need to see the 2023 trials, then you could choose that 2023 folder. Or if they might need to search and find what work we've done in previous years, maybe we should pick one level higher, the overall, R&D research folder or something that has all those years in it. And ARM can find and put in all the files in all of those folders. So this is something you can do just to get a person up and running, or you could do it on your own ARM at any time. So this isn't changing or doing anything to the files themselves. It's just updating what my ARM, my copy of ARM on this computer knows or has in its list for me to search across and filter for. So it's handy even for anyone that, again, kind of that example of maybe right now all I have is the 2022 trials from last year in my list, and I need to catch up with the group who's been loading up all the protocols and trials for this season. I could come in and do the same thing. And the only difference would be the rebuild method. If I want to drop out all those old ones and start with a brand new empty list, then I can clear the existing list and start fresh and only have ones in that folder I chose. Otherwise, if I'm kind of continuing on, I've got all of last year's studies, but I still want to be able to search and find those in my list. So I just want to add anything new that ARM can find. That would be the second option to update the existing list. For the new user, where there is nothing at all, it's not going to make a difference which one's selected, because of course there's an empty list anyway. So then if I click OK, we'll see kind of the first step. ARM will find that folder and figure out how many files it can discover. And then you'll see a progress bar. And the nice thing is this is separate. So I've got 67. It won't take terribly long, but I could, if it's 267, I could certainly be in ARM and start working, and it'll just run in the background there as well. So depending on how many years worth of studies you might have, it might take some time, but you can launch into ARM right away anyway. But here you can see how quick it goes. Essentially, ARM is just opening up the file really briefly, just in memory, in order to fill in the information in the study list, which, as you can see, quite a bit of different information, but it's all just stuff we can filter on and try to narrow down different information about the study. And in my case, it's all the tutorial files we do in webinars, so they're all copies of each other basically for different examples, but that's a way to kind of get the study list for the individual up and going, so they can see and pick and search across the files that everyone at the company is working on. All right, and I guess from the ARM steps of kind of getting you going, I think that pretty much sets them up for success. That they're ready to, whether they're creating a new protocol or starting in on a trial or what have you. That's primarily at the end of setting up the software. But the last subject we want to bring up, oh, and I was worried it was going to do that on me. Can I pause so it does not keep moving? We'll find out. The other onboarding thing that may be very handy is if they've used ARM or not, and how they can learn how to use ARM. And so that's something we've worked hard to provide some options for learning ARM. I think historically it was always you just learn from whoever's used ARM before, sit down and see how they do it. But now we have our ARM Academy, that LMS system we talked about way back at the very beginning of our session with the recordings. Really, it's an online portal that we have different training topics. And primarily at this point, the number one thing to go in there for is the ARM beginner certification. See if I can get it to move to the next slide. And so really it's, there we go. So our beginner certification is the majority of what's in that ARM Academy right now, in addition to kind of our webinar recordings. But the beginner certification is 3 different modules that have just short 5-6 minute videos on a specific topic. And once you've watched that video, then there's a little quiz that just make sure you paid attention and following along. And in total, across those 3 sections, it's maybe a little more than a 2 hours worth of watch time. And so it covers really basic, information overall about ARM and its structure and things like that. Then we talk about creating a protocol, and the main components of a protocol, and then how to create a trial and the main components of a trial, and working with the assessment editor and the treatment list, things like that. So just really, really basic information about ARM that once you've completed it, we think you're at least know enough to be dangerous, if you will, that then you kind of have a basic knowledge of how ARM should work and kind of be able to how to move around in the software. So that's really the biggest use of that online portal at the moment. The nice thing with that system as well is then you really are ARM certified, if you will. So kind of a nice little certificate to show, hey, you completed this, you're on your way, you know the basics of ARM. So that can be really useful for a new person who you might not have the time and resources to have them sit down with somebody who's experienced with ARM, but they can get a good baseline in the ARM software. And then maybe that time they spend with the company expert on ARM can be a lot more valuable, because now that person can share what our company does, what the company does different or based on their research, instead of having to spend a lot of time on just the very basics. That's the same for everybody. So hopefully a good value added for having somebody on board. Just send them into that academy. If I can convince it to go back a slide, it's just out on our website. Here you can scan that to get on there. Otherwise, yep, I knew it was going to switch on me. Just on our website, there's the training and tutorials section. And the LMS, that portal you can find here, there's a link to sign up. You can create a free account. It doesn't have to match your ARM license. It can be for an individual, all of the individuals who might be even just using ARM periodically when they hop on to enter data. You have all the interns and stuff to it as well. Totally free to do, and then they can have that certification and say, hey, I know a little about ARM to use in future endeavors. And then the other component of that, if you're a graduate student, or if you have graduate students that might be working for your company, the timing, I just want to keep moving on. If they go in and finish the certification, they can actually earn a free 2-year license in their name. So we used to just have $200 as the price for a graduate license, just to make people try. If you give something out for free, then they might not try. But on the flip side, we thought, hey, this makes a lot more sense to earn. They earn that certification. They put a little work into learning the tool. Now they can get a hold of that software and have it on their computer to learn and grow in their ARM usage. So that way, when they've completed their degree, they go out to the industry, they know some ARM, so they can bring more value when they join a company. Hey, I've already used ARM. I know the basics. You just have to train me in how you guys do things. So that's something we feel passionate about and want to encourage graduate students. Even if you're in your company and you have just part-time work during the summers or something, that they're graduate students, that's a great way for your company to benefit a little bit, but they can use their ARM licenses that they earn through this as well. That's no problem. They're learning right along with it. So just a great program, I think, to help everyone out on that end and get ARM on more computers and more people learning it. And I guess I don't have a slide on it, but I'll just switch back to that that web page. So that's the training portal where it can keep track of your progress as you go through the courses. We do have just a couple of other resources on training materials. Of course, we have video tutorials, so maybe not strictly just follow this and then this and then this, like the courses are in that portal, but just 5-7 minute videos on a specific topic to learn how to do something in ARM. Those are out there on our website. And then of course, webinars, we're all joined in one right now. Another way to learn more about ARM and access the recordings if you missed out previously. All right, we're almost out of time, but just one last item I think I skipped over, kind of related to our migration package discussion with the lists. I didn't have a specific slide on it, but as we talked about copying, an existing ARM user's lists and files to a new computer, to a new person, you could even take that one level higher and actually have those lists and files shared across the whole company. So that's just another option when you think, hey, that's really slick, but once I copy this migration package, now they can't see changes I make tomorrow or next week because they're two separate computers. So if you really would almost ideally want kind of a master copy, everyone is looking at the same favorites lists and the same SEs and things like that. Primarily the lists, I think, would be the main reason you'd want to do that. It's easy to share the others. But if you want to share those lists and have them synced for everyone using ARM in your group, just let us know. Send us a note in the support. It's actually fairly easy to set up, and then it works pretty smooth once you get it set up. But won't dive into the details of exactly how it's implemented, but it's pretty quick. You get it set up, and then you're up and running, and then everyone can see those same lists. So just another option for your group to kind of level up how those are shared and distributed. All right, well, we've reached the end of our time here. Well, thank everyone for joining and also the great questions throughout. It's always great to be able to know we're covering the topics that matter and are helpful. So and until next time, thanks everybody.